At times, one can feel as if they are forced to beg for love. This isn't solely about romantic relationships, but a pervasive, draining sensation of seeking approval, a painful wait for someone to finally notice, appreciate, and offer that piece of tenderness that seems so desperately missing. This state is akin to being in a vast emotional desert, where every crumb of attention, every drop of affection is implored, yet never truly arrives. However, there is a profound truth that can transform one's entire perception. When this desperate begging for love ceases, something incredible awakens within the individual. Carl Jung, the brilliant explorer who delved into the deepest corners of the human soul, spoke of this very transformation. He discovered what happens when an individual relinquishes this frantic need to be loved from the outside, and instead begins to uncover the love that has long resided within their own being. Prepare yourself, for the upcoming dive into Jung's ideas promises to change not only how one perceives themselves, but also fundamentally influence how they build their relationships and, in essence, their entire life. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychologist whose discoveries revolutionized our understanding of the human mind, left behind an invaluable map for navigating the labyrinths of inner chaos. He was convinced that every person carries within them an entire incomprehensible universe, a profound dimension where their deepest truths, their hidden fears, and most importantly, their purest, untouched love reside. Yet the tragic irony is that instead of looking inward, delving into this inner cosmos, people often spend their entire lives in relentless pursuit of something external. This yearning, this perpetual chase for external sources of satisfaction is, alas, familiar to many. Often individuals are confronted with a sense of inadequacy when someone they consider special doesn't give them due attention. Such a feeling can also arise in situations where a boss, a close friend, or even family members fail to express recognition, leading to the thought of some internal flaw. However, according to Jung's views, this is where the first and fundamental misconception lies. Attempts to find love and validation externally mean detaching oneself from the inexhaustible source that already resides within each person. Just consider, how many sleepless nights have been spent pondering why someone didn't reply to a message, or perhaps one poured their entire being into a relationship, time, effort, emotions, tears, only to feel empty, receiving no equivalent response. It's like offering your soul on a silver platter, waiting for someone to deign to accept it. But Jung reveals a truly radical truth to us. This internal void cannot be filled by other people. On the contrary, this emptiness serves as a powerful signal from the unconscious, that deepest part of the psyche that holds instincts, hidden dreams, and profound truths. When a person desperately seeks love externally, their unconscious, metaphorically speaking, cries out, "Look at me, I am here, within." But in Jung's understanding, the unconscious does not express itself through straightforward verbal formulations. Its communication occurs through symbols, emotional responses, and those intuitive premonitions that sometimes go unnoticed. Imagine, for example, a situation where an individual is near someone who unconsciously makes them feel insignificant. At first glance, external circumstances may seem perfectly fine. The other person says pleasant words, their presence is felt. But deep inside, something doesn't align. An unpleasant knot forms in the stomach. An inner voice persistently whispers, "This isn't right. There's no true match here." This is precisely how the unconscious sends its important message. If a person continues to desperately seek the favor of this individual, ignoring such a clear internal signal, they are committing an act of self-betrayal. And such self-betrayal inevitably carries a high price. Gradually, inner peace, vital energy, and, most importantly, the true essence of one's personality are lost. One could pause for a moment, take a deep breath, and focus on the topic of relationships. We are talking about those connections, be they romantic, friendly, or even family ties, in which a person feels compelled to beg for love or attention. What feelings arise then? Probably exhaustion, deep disappointment, and at times, despair. This image should be kept in mind, as we will return to it. Carl Gustav Jung, the renowned psychoanalyst, would interpret this state as a call from one's own shadow. What is the shadow? This term was introduced by Jung to describe the part of the human personality that remains hidden from consciousness, denied and undesirable to show to the world. Perhaps it's a deep-seated fear of not being good enough, or that hidden anger that arises in response to rejection. Begging for love, then, is like feeding this very shadow, which only strengthens its power over the individual. It's important to note that in such experiences one is by no means alone. This is an experience many have faced. As an illustration, one can imagine the story of Anna, a 32-year-old resident of Bogota. For many years she has been in a relationship where she feels she constantly has to beg for attention and recognition. Her partner is not a bad person, but he is invariably absorbed in his own affairs. Anna's day is spent thinking about how to win his affection and make him appreciate her. She cooks for him, sends caring messages, carefully chooses outfits, but by the end of the day, despite all efforts, she feels absolutely invisible and unacknowledged. One could, for instance, consider the story of Luis, a 40-year-old man living in Los Angeles. He has a friend who invariably reaches out to him only when she needs something. Luis, driven by the hope of her gratitude and appreciation, is always ready to agree to any request. However, in the end, he finds himself completely exhausted and deeply resentful. Does anyone recognize themselves in such a situation, whether in the image of Anna or Luis? Both are, in essence, begging for love, and both neglect what Carl Jung called individuation, the profound process of becoming one's true self, free from any dependence on external evaluations and approval. When a person continues to exist in a state of constant begging, their life energy inevitably depletes. It's as if they have a reservoir of emotional fuel, and they thoughtlessly squander it on those who are unable or unwilling to replenish this reservoir. Jung would likely emphasize that protecting one's energy is by no means an act of selfishness. On the contrary, it is something sacred and extremely important. For it is this energy that grants the ability to wake up each morning with new strength to pursue one's cherished dreams, to experience and give genuine love. But if it is squandered on pleas for meager crumbs of attention and affection, what then remains for the person themselves? Imagine a plant deprived of life-giving moisture. It inevitably withers. Ceasing to beg for love is equivalent to beginning to water oneself, providing oneself with everything necessary for full flourishing. There is a practical exercise that can be done today, based on the profound ideas of Carl Gustav Jung. It is suggested to take a notebook and write down the question, where does one beg for love? It is important to approach this process with complete sincerity. Perhaps such an object is a partner who is constantly busy and does not give due attention, or a mother whose communication is always filled with criticism but lacks warmth and hugs. Sometimes it can even be oneself, punishing oneself for perceived imperfections. After these situations have been carefully noted, another question should be asked: what will happen if I stop begging for this? At this stage, there is no need to take any action. It is enough to simply reflect deeply on this. This exercise serves as the first step towards listening to one's unconscious and beginning the process of liberation from old patterns. Speaking of liberation, an important question arises: what if stopping the plea for love naturally leads to the dissolution of relationships that do not serve one's highest good? This is not a manifestation of magic, but rather demonstrates the work of one's own unconscious in harmony with internal changes. Jung asserted that the people we attract into our lives serve as a mirror of our inner world. If an individual constantly begs for love, they typically attract those who support them in this dynamic of the pleader. However, when an inner transformation occurs, when a person decides, "I will no longer beg," then something amazing unfolds. The universe or life circumstances begin to respond to this new inner state. People who do not resonate with one's true essence gradually leave their life, and those who align with their new inner state begin to appear. If a certain statement resonates deeply within one's soul, then he or she simply needs to say to themselves, "I am ready to stop begging." This action, though seemingly insignificant, possesses incredible power. With each affirmation of this intention, it gains increasing strength. If anyone knows of those who desperately need such an awareness, who are trapped in the fruitless search for external love, it is extremely important to share this knowledge with them. Through united efforts, many lives can be changed. What happens when an individual relinquishes this obsessive need to beg? Their inner shadow begins to manifest with astonishing clarity. Those aspects of the personality that were previously carefully hidden, such as the fear of being rejected, deep insecurity, or an overwhelming need to please, gradually surface. And while such a revelation may initially seem quite frightening, it, in essence, brings true liberation. For when one courageously confronts their shadow, instead of fleeing from it, they gradually begin to integrate it. As the distinguished psychologist Carl Jung asserted, the integration of the shadow does not mean its complete annihilation, but implies a deep acceptance of it as an integral part of one's self. For example, if someone begs for love, driven by a deep-seated fear of being alone, then acknowledging and accepting this fear becomes the first and most significant step on the path to healing it. It's not about pretending that this fear doesn't exist at all, but about being able to firmly tell it, "Okay, I see you, but you no longer control things here." Imagine Sophia, a single mother living in vibrant Mexico City. For many years, she constantly felt an inner need to win the love and recognition of her family, believing that only by showing strength and resilience could she earn their affection. The family dynamic was such that when all family members were doing well, they eagerly turned to Sophia, sought her company. However, in moments when their own difficulties subsided, they seemed to completely ignore her existence. This constant struggle for attention and affection exhausted Sophia to the limit, turning her life into an endless plea for warmth and participation. A day came when Sophia made the fateful decision to end this exhausting cycle. She began to resolutely say no to demands that drained her energy and actively set healthy personal boundaries. Initially, as expected, she faced significant resistance. Her family members struggled to understand what was happening, feeling bewildered by her new rules. However, step by step, the situation began to change. Gradually, Sophia stopped feeling like a perpetual martyr, slowly gaining a sense of her true self, her authentic essence. That part of her that Carl Jung would call the shadow, her deeply rooted need to be a savior for everyone, finally lost its power over her. In light of this story, a question arises for deep self-reflection. What specific part of your own shadow urgently demands to be seen and recognized? This becomes another important point for contemplation. It is worth considering what hidden fear pushes one to beg for love and approval. Perhaps it is the fear of being completely alone, or a deep conviction of one's own inadequacy. It is suggested to hold this thought, as further reflection will show how precisely liberation from such fears can radically transform all personal relationships. Before delving deeper into this topic, it is important to note the following. The person reflecting on these questions is already on the right path. The very presence and willingness to listen and absorb information is a significant step towards achieving one's own authenticity. And, as Jung would assert, this is indeed the beginning of everything. It has already been said how one's inner world, their shadow, and the unconscious persistently urge change when they are in a state of begging for love. These deep signals, like an inner voice, insistently demand that one stop pleading and turn their gaze inward. Now, it is appropriate to consider what happens when one takes this decisive step, letting go of the obsessive need to seek validation and love externally. According to Carl Jung, it is at this moment that the movement towards individuation begins, this sacred process of becoming one's true, authentic self. And truly, when an individual stops asking for love from the external world, their relationships, their life energy, and even their fundamental perception of reality are transformed beyond recognition, revealing horizons that previously seemed unthinkable. Let us return to the previously stated thought. Begging for love often resembles a closed, exhausting cycle in which a person constantly gives, hoping to receive something equivalent in return. However, Jung reveals to us that such a cycle is by no means accidental. It represents a manifestation of projection, another fundamental concept in his teaching. Projection, in essence, is the process whereby an individual unconsciously attributes to others those qualities, feelings, or aspects of their personality that they carry within themselves but refuse or are unable to confront. For example, if a person persistently seeks validation and love from their partner while experiencing a deep sense of their own inadequacy or not enoughness, then the root of the problem lies not only in the external object of their pleas. The true cause is found in that unaccepted part of one's own self, in that inner insecurity that is projected onto relationships, forcing the individual to beg for someone else to correct this internal deficit. Imagine Carla, a 28-year-old woman living in vibrant and dynamic Medellin. A person entered her life who, it seemed, embodied all ideals. He was attentive and caring, possessed a sparkling sense of humor and incredible charm. However, should he distance himself even slightly, delay a message, or suddenly cancel plans, Carla is overcome with deep anxiety. She immediately falls into a state of panic, begins to flood him with excessive messages, cunningly invents various pretexts for meeting, and persistently seeks his attention. The reason for such a tumultuous reaction lies in her deeply rooted fear. Deep down, she is afraid that if she is not wanted, if she does not constantly confirm her usefulness, then she is worth nothing. Her value is reduced to zero. As the great analyst Carl Jung would note, Carla is, in essence, transferring or projecting her deficit of self-worth and self-love onto these relationships. The true problem lies not in external circumstances, not in her partner's behavior, but in that deep internal deficit where Carla has failed to give herself the unconditional love and acceptance she so desperately seeks and demands from another person. Now let's imagine a completely different situation, but with the same psychological underpinnings, using the example of Javier, a 35-year-old man from bustling Miami. He has a boss who, despite all of Javier's efforts, never acknowledges his hard work and achievements. Javier exhausts himself, working overtime, dedicating hours of his personal time to the office in a relentless pursuit of recognition and praise that, alas, remain elusive. He feels a deep sense of emptiness and disappointment, yet despite this he continues to persistently seek this elusive approval. For Carl Jung, such a situation is also a clear example of projection. Javier, in essence, seeks in the external world, specifically in his boss's approval, the validation of his own worth and significance that he is somehow unable or unwilling to give himself. One may well find traits of Carla or Javier within themselves, or perhaps something of both. However, there is a hopeful prospect. This repetitive pattern is amenable to disruption. When an individual ceases to beg for love, truly astonishing metamorphoses unfold. A process of restoring one's own inner power and autonomy occurs. Carl Gustav Jung, the renowned psychoanalyst, asserted that genuine love is not the result of pleading or begging. On the contrary, it blossoms from within, manifesting when a person achieves harmony with their true essence, with their authenticity. Here, the concept of authenticity is not merely a pleasant term borrowed from self-help literature. It means existing in accordance with one's deepest nature, without false masks, without pretending to be someone one is not, merely to gain acceptance and love. How does one determine if they are living in accordance with this inner essence? The answer is simple. If there is a feeling that one needs to transform, to hide their true traits, or even to beg for acceptance, this indicates moving against one's own nature. In such moments, it is recommended to pause, take a deep breath. One should reflect on someone in their circle, a partner, a friend, a family member. Does one feel that their affection must be constantly earned, that if certain actions are not performed for them, they might lose interest or attachment? It is suggested to recall these relationships and ask, what will happen if the individual stops begging here? No immediate answer is required. Simply feeling the question is enough. According to Jung, This feeling is a manifestation of the unconscious, indicating where one has projected their own value. A logical question arises: how does one act in such a situation? Another specific measure is offered for execution. One can perform a small symbolic ritual, drawing its roots from the profound ideas of Carl Gustav Jung. For this, one should take a clean sheet of paper and carefully write on it the name of the person from whom, it is felt, love, validation, or recognition is constantly sought. Directly below this name, the following phrase should be written: "I release you from the responsibility of making me feel enough." After this, the paper is recommended to be carefully burned or methodically torn into many small fragments. It is important to understand that this action is not directed at another person. It is intended solely for oneself. In essence, it becomes a powerful way to convey a clear message to one's own unconscious. I am ready to stop begging and begin to truly love myself. At first glance, this may seem surprisingly simple, yet the profound symbolism that Carl Gustav Jung so highly valued possesses colossal, almost invisible power. It is at the moment when this deep letting go occurs that internal processes begin to actively move. Relationships that initially do not resonate with one's authentic inner truth naturally run their course. One does not need to engage in confrontation, raise their voice, or issue ultimatums. Simply by letting go of persistent requests and the desire to beg for attention, a fundamental shift occurs in one's own energy. Carl Gustav Jung, who deeply studied the human psyche, often mentioned the phenomenon of synchronicity, these amazing, meaningful coincidences that occur precisely when a person is in complete harmony with themselves. As a vivid example, one can imagine a situation where a person makes a firm decision to stop seeking attention from that friend who is constantly busy and never has time for them. Suddenly, as if by magic, they meet someone new, perhaps at work, in a cozy cafe, who genuinely values them without any need for requests or efforts. This is precisely the manifestation of synchronicity. The universe, in essence, responds to an inner request when a person is harmoniously attuned to their own authentic essence. However, not all aspects of this process are exclusively bright. Liberation from old attachments inevitably entails encountering emptiness. When an individual ceases to exhaustingly seek or beg for anyone's affection, they may initially feel a deep inner void. Carl Jung, a distinguished thinker, asserted that this space should not evoke fear. On the contrary, he called it a sacred realm where something entirely new originates and strengthens. This process is akin to pruning a garden tree. Removing dry and dead branches is necessary for new, vibrant shoots to blossom in their place. As a striking example, one can consider the story of Marisol, a 45-year-old resident of Guadalajara. For many years, she fruitlessly sought expressions of love from her mother, a woman known for her emotional coldness and detachment. When Marisol decided to relinquish this painful need, she was initially overcome by a feeling of deep sadness, as if she had lost something important. However, over time, this inner space gradually filled with a sense of serene peace, the sincere support of true friends, and, most valuable of all, an unprecedented sense of self-respect and self-love. There is another important aspect that requires contemplation. If this profound message resonates within one's soul, they are encouraged to utter an internal affirmation: I release what does not serve me. Moreover, if there is someone in one's circle who desperately needs such guidance, perhaps a family member entangled in a labyrinth of toxic relationships, or a friend exhausting themselves in pursuit of external approval, it is extremely important to share these reflections with them. Every action aimed at spreading this life-giving idea helps it reach those who need it most. Just imagine the colossal effect that could be achieved if everyone collectively stopped begging for love, finding inner freedom and dignity. Returning to the realm of interpersonal relationships, it should be noted that abandoning the practice of begging entails radical changes not only in existing connections, but also in the character of those one attracts into their life. The distinguished psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, in his works, invariably emphasized the conviction that the nature of our relationships with others is nothing less than a mirror reflection of our own inner state and worldview. When a person is in a begging position, they generally unconsciously attract individuals who not only support but also exacerbate this dysfunctional dynamic of relationships. This refers to those who tend to only consume without providing anything in return, who force the other person to constantly prove their worth and earn their affection or attachment, creating a perpetual sense of inadequacy. However, once an individual ceases this practice and consciously declares that their love begins with themselves, they naturally start to attract those who can perceive their true essence without pretense. In such a situation, there's no longer any need to prove anything or humbly beg for attention and affection. On the contrary, the person receives genuine love and acceptance simply for existing, for their unique self. This concept can be vividly illustrated as a kind of filter. The practice of begging for love acts like a powerful magnet, drawing relationships into one's life that are abundant in dramatic events and emotional turmoil, along with individuals who mercilessly drain one's vitality and energy. But as soon as this destructive magnet is released, the vector of attraction fundamentally shifts. Chaos is replaced by an attraction to tranquility, deep mutual respect, and, most importantly, to authentic, unconditional love. It's remarkable that the external world doesn't transform. Rather, the individual themselves changes their way of interacting with it, recalibrating their internal settings and perceptions. Carl Gustav Jung called this process integration, a state where all aspects of the personality, including both its light and shadow sides, are fully unified, allowing one to live in a state of true authenticity. From this pivotal moment, love ceases to be an object of supplication or a desire for possession. It transforms into something one generously shares with the world and others, flowing from their own completeness. Before moving further along this path, it makes sense to take another deep pause. Imagine a life completely free from the obsessive need to ingratiate and plead. What would it be like to wake up each morning aware of your unconditional self-sufficiency and worth without needing to pursue anyone's affection or approval? Let this image solidify in your mind, for the next part of the narrative will reveal how to bring it into reality, step by step. For now, take a deep breath and trust the process. You stand on the threshold of discovering the true power of no longer begging. We have come a significant way together. We've discussed how constantly begging for approval and love alienates a person from their own core, how the deep aspects of their psyche, their shadow side and unconscious, persistently signal the need to stop, and how letting go of this obsessive need fundamentally transforms their relationships with others. Now, we will conclude this journey with something truly powerful: understanding how to live from your own authenticity, that very place where love is not something begged for, but flows freely and naturally. Carl Jung left humanity an unambiguous and profound legacy. True wholeness and self-sufficiency come not from outside, not from external sources of approval, but solely from the internal integration of all aspects of one's true self. And when a person finally stops flattering and pleading for love, they discover with surprise that everything they strived for and sought externally was already present within them. Imagine a person standing before a mirror. For years, this mirror showed them a distorted reflection of their true essence, someone constantly needing external approval, forced to win over the affection and attachment of others. But when they stop begging, this mirror, as if by magic, clears. The person sees in it a whole, self-sufficient individual, possessing unconditional worth, unequivocally deserving of love, without the slightest need to prove anything to anyone. Jung would undoubtedly have called this the essence of the individuation process. It's not about striving for some ideal perfection, but about being oneself in all their fullness, with all their facets, both light and shadow, and everything that forms their unique individuality. And from this moment, the very nature of love undergoes a radical change. Instead of begging for it, a person begins to give it to others from an inner source of abundance. Consider a similar situation. Recall the story of Ana, a resident of Bogota, who for a long time sought her partner's attention. When she stopped these persistent attempts and ceased begging for recognition, not only did her personal relationships transform, eventually concluding, but her entire life did too. She began to attract true friends and unique opportunities, allowing her to truly flourish and shine. Similarly, consider the case of Javier, a man from Miami who constantly sought approval from his boss. Freeing himself from this obsessive need, he found the inner courage for radical change, switching jobs, and now he is where he is valued and respected without being required to constantly prove his worth. Such metamorphoses are not coincidental. They are the natural result of a process where a person harmonizes themselves with their inner truth and authentic self. At this point, it's appropriate to pause briefly. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, what part of your true essence might you have been hiding to earn someone's love or approval? Perhaps it's an infectious, loud laugh that sometimes causes embarrassment, or a bold, even crazy dream of starting your own business that you haven't dared to tell anyone about yet. Keep this important thought in mind as we will explore how to bring it into reality next. The great psychoanalyst Carl Jung asserted that the unconscious constantly guides a person toward their authentic self. But to do so, one must learn to listen to its signals, and true listening, in his view, always implies active engagement. There is one final practical action you can embark on today. Make a list of 3 qualities or aspects of your personality that you value in yourself. These traits can be quite modest, such as the ability to make your friends laugh, or significant, like the inner strength to overcome great difficulties. Then, write down 3 actions you would take if you weren't afraid of being rejected. Perhaps it would be a firm no to someone who drains your energy, or starting that project you've constantly postponed. This exercise can be compared to an unspoken agreement made with your own unconscious. You are, in essence, telling your inner world, I see you, I hear you, I will act. And when actions are taken from this inner agreement, the feeling of attachment and acceptance that previously had to be begged for transforms into love that is freely given and naturally received. And speaking of receiving, it's important to clarify one point. Ceasing to beg does not mean you stop needing others. The renowned thinker Jung, for example, was by no means a recluse. On the contrary, he deeply believed in the importance of human connections, but emphasized that true connection is only possible when it stems from a genuine, authentic place. Imagine Laura, a 38-year-old resident of Los Angeles. She always felt the need to be noticed and desired by her friends. When she stopped begging for this external acceptance and began to show herself as she truly is, sometimes quiet, sometimes serious, she was surprised to discover that her true friends remained by her side. True love, as is known, does not demand that a person distort themselves or adapt beyond recognition. However, in practice, the question arises, how does one follow this principle in daily life? Carl Jung offers us valuable tools based on his profound ideas. One such tool is active reflection. Whenever an individual feels an overwhelming need to beg for favor or attention, be it an unanswered message or a glance that was never given, it is important to stop immediately. In such moments, it is possible to find solace in a pause, to allow oneself to rest, or to give oneself the inner embrace that the soul so desperately needs. Another powerful tool proposed by Jung is setting boundaries. If someone's presence or behavior consistently drains a person's energy, the ability to say no without a trace of guilt becomes a genuine act of self-respect and self-care. Jung emphasized that such behavior is crucial for the process of individuation, becoming a whole and unique individual. Take another moment for deep reflection. Imagine a relationship where you feel you are giving much more than you receive in return. What would happen if a clear boundary was set in such a relationship? There's no need to take this action right now. Simply imagine the consequences. Perhaps it would be a phrase addressed to a partner. I need you to listen to me too, or to a friend. I can't be available at all times. This seemingly insignificant act can change the entire dynamic of the interaction. When a person stops pleading for attention and begins to build relationships from their inner strength and self-sufficiency, the phenomenon of synchronicity reappears in their life. Jung held a deep affection for this concept, the idea of events that seem coincidental but possess deep, meaningful significance. For example, an individual stops begging an ex-partner to return and suddenly meets someone who sees them in a way they never felt seen before. Or, having left an exhausting job, a person discovers a much more favorable opportunity before them. This is not simple magic or cheap tricks, but a natural consequence of living life in harmony with one's authentic self. The universe, or as you prefer, the unconscious, invariably responds to such sincere being. Before this narrative concludes, I invite you to take a specific action. If this message has resonated deeply within your soul, I encourage you to mentally utter these significant words: I choose my authenticity. Furthermore, if you know someone who constantly strives to beg for love, whether it's a relative trapped in a destructive relationship or a friend sacrificing their individuality to please others, I recommend sharing these reflections with them. Every effort aimed at spreading this important message helps it reach those who need it most. So the natural question arises, what happens when an individual stops persistently begging for love? A profound reunion with one's true essence occurs. The shadow side of the personality ceases to be a source of internal conflict and transforms into a valuable guide. Such a person's relationships are cleansed of excessive drama and filled with authenticity. Their long-held aspirations, those very dreams that were set aside due to fear of rejection, begin to awaken to life, and most importantly, a state of deep peace is attained. This is not superficial tranquility, but that all-encompassing calmness that stems from the awareness of one's own sufficient worth, accepting oneself as they are. In short, the eminent psychoanalyst Carl Jung demonstrated that the desire to beg for love is in fact a detachment from one's core essence. When a person frees themselves from this obsessive need, integrates their shadow side, heeds the call of their unconscious, and begins to live in accordance with their authentic self, the result is a full and rich life. It is accompanied by relationships that contribute to their spiritual growth and inspire them, as well as love that does not need to be begged for. Finally, I offer you a profound thought for reflection. True love, the kind so often sought in the external world, already resides deep within the human soul. The time has come to cease the persistent search for this feeling outside and instead begin to cultivate it, manifesting it from within yourself. It is this realization, this inner transformation, that is the true magic I have sought to help each of you discover. Take a moment for deep self-reflection. Consider, what are you ready to release today? What specific step will you take to stop seeking external approval and fully embrace yourself, beginning to truly love? I urge you to share these personal insights, as I sincerely wish to learn from them. If this message has resonated with your heart and served as a source of inspiration, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need a similar impetus for change. For together, we can transform lives. I express my deep gratitude for your presence, for your attentive listening, and for your active participation in this significant transformation process. It is important to remember that true change begins within each individual, and the world, without a doubt, needs your unique